Hi there! I've been in something of a funk lately. Nothing was really grabbing my attention and everything was just fine. I managed to drag myself out of that kicking and screaming, however, and so today I have some bookish cures for common ailments for you. Welcome aboard the International Express to Book Central. Grab a seat, settle in, and let's while away the journey with some book chat. I'm your host Jules, and like I said, I'm recently recovered from a funk. It was a weird experience the past few weeks, where I would read a book and it would be fine. I would watch a film and it would be fine. I would do my work and it was fine. And nothing was really giving me a proper connection. Nothing was making me excited, but nothing was even making me sad. It just felt a bit numb. So I was quite glad that I managed to kick myself out of that funk, because that's not a delightful way to live. But it did inspire me to do today's episode, in which I'm going to give you, as the title suggests, some bookish cures for common ailments. Now, this is all meant in good fun. If anything is seriously wrong, you should find a professional who can help you with that. But this is just meant as a kind of inspiration. If you're feeling any of these things, then well, perhaps these books can get you out of that feeling. So, without further ado, let's get into some cures. The first ailment I have for you is that of disillusionment. This is generally defined as a feeling of disappointment resulting from the discovery that something is not as good as one believed it to be. And that was definitely true for me in the past few weeks. And I think it's true for anyone who's settled into adult life and realized, okay, I guess life is just work, emails, doing laundry, doing chores, checking in with people, being checked in on, eating, drinking, and going to sleep, and then doing everything all over again. There can be this disenchantment, this disillusionment with life. And I found that one of the best cures for this feeling is the work of the incomparable Terry Pratchett. In his book, The We Free Men, the 30th of his Discworld novels, Terry Pratchett wrote that, quote, "It doesn't stop being magic just because you know how it works," end quote. And I think that quote is the perfect reason as to why Terry Pratchett's Discworld novels are my cure for disillusionment. The way Terry Pratchett writes, the way he manages to imbue the smallest thing with a sense of wonder, and how he doesn't rely on something big and epic and grand in order to overwhelm you with feelings, that just works so well against this disappointment that things aren't as good or as exciting or as special as you believed them to be when you were younger. In his books, at least in my personal experience of them, all the small things are imbued with a certain kind of relevance. The smallest skill, the most basic conversation can be something from which something beautiful comes. And I enjoyed that very much. The idea that, okay, here's something beautiful, here's something stunning, and it is something I can find in the world around me. My quest, my adventure, it can just be my everyday life, and I can start finding beauty and magic in that on the small level. Things don't always have to top themselves. The sequel doesn't have to be bigger and better to the point where you're fighting God in your next novel. No, it can just be something small that is incredibly meaningful nonetheless. And I found that that is a very good way for me to rediscover some of my faith in the fact that life is good, that it can be good, that things can be beautiful. And so I would absolutely recommend the Discworld novels. The other reason that they're great is that you can just dip into whichever one you want. You do not have to start with the first and make your way through all of them. You can pick the book that sounds most attractive to you. In my case, those were the Witches novels. So, for example, Equal Rights and Weird Sisters. I love those novels, and I've got another one waiting for me as an audiobook. But you can dive in at any point, and that is again something lovely, that you don't have to slog through whatever book you might not be interested in. No, you can just go straight to what intrigues you and find a beautiful and good story there. So, my cure for disillusionment is Terry Pratchett. The next element I have for you is that of impermanence, which is defined as the state or fact of lasting for only a limited period of time. So, I don't know if anyone else has ever felt that life feels impermanent, but not just life on the grand scale, but also just everything in daily life, whether it's, the fruit that is already rotting even though you've just brought it back from the supermarket, the job that is time limited and you don't know if your contract will be extended, the relationship you have, whatever. Sometimes all of that can make you feel impermanent. Now, the idea of impermanence has been quite important to some world religions like Buddhism, for example, but also in philosophy. It was Heraclitus, a Greek philosopher, who said, "No man ever steps in the same river twice," as Pocahontas then also sang later on. And this idea has been important in developing the idea or the philosophical concept of becoming. But my question here is, what do we do when we feel like we aren't becoming anything? That we're not actually being anything, but merely just existing for the briefest amount of time and doing one thing after the other? Well, that is a feeling that I am unfortunately familiar with. But I have found the perfect bookish cure to get rid of it, or at least to dive into it more deeply and thereby allow you to get past it. And that is a short novella called Temporary by Hilary Leichter. I'm going to read you the blurb from Goodreads. Here we go. In Temporary, a young woman's workplace is the size of the world. She fills increasingly bizarre placements in search of steadiness, connection, and something at last to call her own. Whether it's shining an endless closet of shoes, swabbing the deck of a pirate ship, assisting an assassin, or filling in for the chairman of the board for the mythical Temporary, there is nothing more personal than doing your job. This riveting quest, at once hilarious and profound, will resonate with anyone who has ever done their best at work, even when the work is only temporary. I listened to this as an audiobook, and I'd bought it because it sounded interesting, but I wasn't expecting a whole lot from it. And then I just sunk so deeply into this character, this young woman who is a temporary, which means she's always just filling in somewhere, just being somewhere for a short period of time. And although Hilary Leichter absolutely takes this to lovely extremes by including, for example, a pirate ship or an assassin, she does get to that core of the feeling of not having any steadiness, of nothing lasting, of not being really connected to something. And I found that while listening to this book, I was thinking about this in my own life, and I realized, hey, maybe I do have a certain worry niggling in the back of my mind that what I'm currently doing isn't permanent, that I will have to look for a different job in the future, that my contract might not be extended, that I might not be able to stay living where I currently am, that I might have to move again, that my friendships therefore will change, that I'll have to try and find new friends again and new hobbies. And I realized, hey, this is something that I may be thinking about, or something that is pressing on my mind without me being aware of it. And while working through this book, I kind of came to a sense of peace with those worries. And I think, therefore, that Temporary by Hilary Leichter is a great cure for the sense of impermanence. Another thing that might be ailing you is a feeling of being untethered. Untethered is defined as a state of not being physically connected or fastened to something. Now, I would extend this a little bit and saying that it's not just about being physically connected, but also about feeling emotionally connected to the world around you. But I think this comes hand in hand with actually physically engaging with your world. And therefore my recommendation, the first of two actually, is The Living Mountain by Nan Shepherd. Here is a blurb. In this masterpiece of nature writing, Nan Shepherd describes her journeys into the Cairngorm Mountains of Scotland. There she encounters a world that can be breathtakingly beautiful at times and shockingly harsh at others. Her intense poetic prose explores and records the rocks, rivers, creatures, and hidden aspects of this remarkable landscape. Shepherd spent a lifetime in search of the essential nature of the Cairngorms. Her quest led her to write this classic meditation on the magnificence of mountains and on our imaginative relationship with the wild world around us. Composed during the Second World War, the manuscript of The Living Mountain lay untouched for more than 30 years before it was finally published. I listened to this book as an audiobook again, narrated by Tilda Swinton, which was a joy, during one of many lockdowns. And at that point, I felt completely untethered from the world around me. I couldn't really go outside, I couldn't really connect with people, and it was actually that idea of being able to go outside, of connecting with the physical world and being able to touch it, literally, that was getting to me. I stopped recognizing my own place in the grand circle of life, to be dramatic about it, and that wasn't good for my mental health, but also not for my physical health. I started losing track of small details, of things that were important to notice, and I started losing touch mentally with my body in the sense that I felt a bit disconnected from it. And The Living Mountain actually fixed that for me. My family and I used to spend quite a few summers hiking in the French Alps, and so having Nan Shepherd explore these mountains and share her ideas of it with me reminded me of those times where I learned to connect with my body, trust my body, to catch me, to balance me, etc. And that was a really nice reminder. On top of that, the scenery that she describes in The Living Mountain is stunning. I could just close my eyes, which is easy with an audiobook. I wouldn't recommend that if you're reading it physically. But I could close my eyes and imagine like wading through a loch, or feeling the ice cold of the water, or the thrill of encountering an animal in the wild. And her language is all so precise and stripped back that it doesn't feel like she's just trying to overwhelm you with something pretty. No, she wants to show you her love and her passion for these mountains. And that really infects you while you're listening to it or reading it yourself. And therefore, I think that The Living Mountain by Nan Shepherd is an excellent way to tether yourself physically back to this earth. Another recommendation I would give you, however, if you're maybe not into nature writing or into nonfiction, then one way of connecting yourself physically to important small details, to the surroundings, are locked room mysteries. And here I would recommend a book I've already covered previously as well, The Honjin Murders, or Death on Gokomon Island, or one of the Detective Kosuke Kindaichi novels by Seishi Yokomizo. As locked room mysteries, these novels require you to pay attention to every single detail. You can't float away from these stories and expect to get what's going on. You have to pay attention to what people say, how they say it, where things are placed, where things have gone missing, etc. So there are so many details here that you can't help but fasten on to it and thereby lose your sense of being untethered. Another thing that might be ailing you is the sense of desiderium. This is defined as an ardent desire or longing, especially a feeling of loss or grief for something lost. I don't know if I'm the only one who sometimes feels that, things weren't as they used to be. And that's the sense of disillusionment coming back again. But it's also the idea that something has been lost, that things aren't quite as they used to be. And here I again have two recommendations for you. The first is a non-fiction book, and it's called Gone, A Search for What Remains of the World's Extinct Creatures by Michael Blencowe. Here is the Goodreads blurb. Inspired by his childhood obsession with extinct species, Blencowe takes us around the globe, from the forests of New Zealand to the ferries of Finland, from the urban sprawl of San Francisco to an inflatable crocodile on Brighton's Whitewater Lagoon. Spanning 5 centuries, from the last sighting of New Zealand's upland moa to the 2012 death of the Pinta Island giant tortoise, Lonesome George, this memoir is peppered with the accounts of the hunters and naturalists of the past, as well as revealing conversations with the custodians of these totemic animals today. Now, this might initially strike you as the wrong kind of book to read if you already feel like things have been lost. And I appreciate that, but stick with me, because in this book, Blencowe kind of follows his childhood interest and takes us into it with him. And while he focuses on the discovery of animals and also their destruction and everything in between, the way he speaks to us is not negative, if that makes sense. You're not being preached to in this book. Your feeling of some things have passed. They are no longer reachable. We can never get this back. That feeling is absolutely present throughout the book. But you're not receiving a lecture about how horrible things are or how terrible we as humans have been. There absolutely is attention gone on how we as humans have had a negative effect on the world around us, but Blencowe's own passion also shows us that we can do better in the future and that we do care and that none of that knowledge is entirely lost. So rather than walking away from this book kind of feeling defeated, it filled me with a strange kind of hope, and like I'd gotten closer to a piece of the past. A slight warning, of course, there are some descriptions of animal cruelty in this book, as it is about the extinction of certain animals, but that is, for me at least, slightly balanced out by beautiful illustrations done by Jade Day, which make this a beautiful book to kind of dip into and see what has been lost, but also what we recover. But when we're speaking of ardent desire and longing, but also grieving over things that might have been lost, I also have a fiction recommendation for you, and that is the book Fire Sermon by Jamie Quatro. Here is the Goodreads blurb. Married 20 years to Thomas and living in Nashville with her 2 children, Maggie is drawn illocutably into a passionate affair while still fiercely committed to her husband and family. What begins as a platonic intellectual and spiritual exchange between writer Maggie and poet James gradually transforms into an emotional and erotically charged bond that challenges Maggie's sense of loyalty and morality, drawing her deeper into the darkness of desire. Using an array of narrative techniques and written in spare, elegant prose, Jamie Quatro gives us a compelling account of one woman's emotional, psychological, physical, and spiritual yearnings, unveiling the impulses and contradictions that reside in us all. So there's your blurb, and I do agree with almost all of that. I was intrigued by this blurb when I first started reading it, and then for ages I didn't actually read the book. But once I dove into it, and I think I've covered this book previously on kind of what we read or a book summary post, but when I read it, it felt pulsatingly alive with desire. It was searing and incredibly personal, and there was so much passion to this book, but also so much consideration. So Maggie is not just a woman having an affair. The novel is also about her kind of looking back at her own life, at being raised religiously and how her faith has always been a cornerstone, and now she finds herself questioning it. So we find her kind of longing for passion now, passion that has been lost, and also the safety and comfort of a childhood which felt so secure in the context of faith and religion. And I found that absolutely fascinating. And because the book is so much about desire, it brings you alive when you read it as well. There is raw emotion in this book, which made me, on the one hand, feel a bit better about being quite calm in many situations. I was like, at least we're not going through all of this. But then on the other hand, it did open my mind towards other kinds of passion and desire. On top of that, it's written in a really interesting way. And so what it also did for me is kind of light that that fire and that desire to write and create, because I was so intrigued with how Jamie Quatro wrote in this book. So this book definitely had a grip on my mind. I think it balances out the desire and longing side of Desiderium very well, whereas Gone by Michael Blencowe will help you deal with that loss or grief for something that we've lost. We only have 2 more ailments to go, and the next one is apathy. Apathy is defined as a lack of interest, enthusiasm, or concern. Basically, for me, apathy pretty much means just not really feeling anything. And that is not great, because nothing excites you and nothing alarms you. And before you know it, you've walked into a position in your life where, well, it's too late to respond now. And a novel which actually kind of brings me out of apathy because of how full of obsession it is Possession by A.S. Byatt. Here is a blurb. Possession is an exhilarating novel of wit and romance, at once an intellectual mystery and a triumphant love story. It is the tale of a pair of young scholars researching the lives of 2 Victorian poets. As they uncover their letters, journals, and poems and track their movements from London to Yorkshire, from spiritualist seances to the fairy-haunted far west of Brittany, what emerges is an extraordinary counterpoint of passions and ideas. I do work in academia, so maybe it's not that surprising that this novel drew me in. But the reason that it feels like the perfect cure for apathy, for me, is that its main characters are obsessed with something. They're either obsessed with the poets that they're studying, they're obsessed with each other, with what's going on, they're looking for clues, but then maybe they're also falling in love. All of these different things are going on in different narrative strands and in different time periods. You have different people to hold on to, etc. So for me, this novel, which is also a bit satirical and a bit sassy when it comes to academia, is delightful. As the kind of friendship between these 2 young scholars develops and as it builds up, and how you get to move around through Victorian London, but also stormy Brittany, and then dusty mansions, and there are, like I mentioned, spooky seances, you will become obsessed with what is going on. And that is a pretty quick fix to apathy. Also, this novel is subtitled a romance, and I think that is quite deliberate. There are elements of mystery and suspense, there are gothic overtones, for example, but there's also love, relationships, adultery, the search for fulfillment, and the romance isn't just a romance between 2 people, it is also a romance with, or a love for, a piece of art, for a person that's inspired you, for life itself. It will wake you up, this novel. Especially if you're into dark academia, but I think just in general, if you give it a go, it will absolutely delight you. And there's nothing apathetic about this novel. And with that, I've reached my final ailment, which is the state of being volatile. This is defined as a state of being liable to change rapidly and unpredictably, especially for the worse. Now, my recommendation for this is a bit tongue-in-cheek, because it is My Nemesis by Charmaine Craig. Here is the blurb. Tessa is a successful white woman writer who develops a friendship, first by correspondence and then in person, with Charlie, a ruggedly handsome philosopher and scholar based in Los Angeles. Sparks fly as they exchange ideas about Camus and masculine desire, and their intellectual connection promises more. But there are obstacles to this burgeoning relationship. While Tessa's husband Milton enjoys Charlie's company on his visits to the East Coast, Charlie's mixed-race Asian wife War is a different case, and she proves to be both adversary and conundrum to Tessa. War's traditional femininity and subservience to her husband strikes Tessa as weaknesses, and she scoffs at the sacrifices War makes as adoptive mother to a Burmese girl, Khtet, once homeless on the streets of Kuala Lumpur. But Hua has a kind of power too, especially over Charlie, and the conflict between the 2 women leads to Tessa's martini-fueled declaration that Hua is an insult to womankind. As Tessa is forced to deal with the consequences of her outburst and considers how much she is limited by her own perceptions, she wonders if Wa is really as weak as she seems to be, or if she might have a different kind of strength altogether. I read this book a while back, and it does really start with that moment where Tessa just calls Wa an insult to womankind, and she totally means it. And there's nothing quite as volatile as in the middle of a dinner between yourself, your partner, a friend that you're maybe trying to have an affair with, and his wife, just completely and utterly insulting his wife. Tessa, throughout My Nemesis, is a tornado. There is no moment where I was sure what Tessa was going to do. She's all over the place, and it is just, it's delightfully messy. I do also think that My Nemesis as a novel interrogates feminism, race, class, motherhood, womanhood, all of that, but because we get Tessa's perspective throughout, we are a little limited to just her slightly misleading perception of things. It is a bit of a shocking book. It is a bit of a shocking premise. Charmaine Craig throughout kind of pulls no punches, and she shows Tessa, especially Tessa, but also some of the other characters, from their worst angles, just making the weirdest of choices and sticking with them and defending them. And I think if you've ever felt a little volatile, if you've ever thought you were going to say the wrong thing if you didn't get out of a room right now, read My Nemesis by Charmaine Craig and rest assured that you couldn't be as bad as Tessa is. So, those are my bookish cures for common ailments. If these ailments are not common, if you've never felt this way, then I congratulate you very heartily. But if you have felt these, and if these books in some way cure you of that, at least for a while, then I'll be very pleased. If you have other cures, or if you have ailments that you'd like me to find a cure for, do let me know. And otherwise, that's it for today. If you have questions, thoughts on the book, or recommendations or requests for future episodes, feel free to leave a comment or send me an email at bookcentralpod@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. You can also subscribe to be informed when new episodes drop. You can find references to the materials used today in the description. Book Central is written and produced by me, and our music is by Scott Buckley. Thank you for joining me today on the International Express to Book Central.